Yeah.
describe the conversation or hashtag it, it's all new to me, man.
Yeah.
It's Greek. This is completely Greek. Dude, let's start this formally.
All right.
Okay. Holy smokes, it's Hot Mike. Jared, you're back.
I am.
What's up, buddy?
To a brand new introduction.
Yes. Yeah. I come in with the energy, man. I'm trying to come in hot. Well, I've missed you, and I'm so happy to have you back in here. And to give you probably the introduction that I didn't give you last time, I want to give a little bit more into your background, what you specialize in, what your occupation is, where you're coming from. You are a software engineer. This is a podcast about art and the creative process, and I certainly see what you do as creative. So I would love to first hear a little bit more about what you do, what your background is, and how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in Fort Collins, moved here from the Bay Area, where I lived in Oakland, and I moved out there because that is the place to get your career started as a software engineer, or one of the places. There are some benefits to doing it out there. I think we talked about some of the downsides last time.
We can get into that again if we need to. Let's just let it happen naturally.
Yeah. And so I studied computer science at California Polytechnic in San Luis Obispo, which was a pretty fun place to be for that handful of years. Before that, I was a self-taught software engineer, or really programmer. And we can talk about the distinction there. It's something I learned to do in high school with some help from my older brother. He was really into it. He really encouraged me. And learning to program was sort of the thing that I did when I didn't want to do my homework, which was always because I was a pretty bad student.
Okay.
And yeah, just thought it was so endlessly interesting. And so then
you said self-taught.
Self-taught, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how did that come about?
So unlike, it's hard to be like a self-taught chemist, right? But all of the materials that you work with in programming are essentially freely available on your computer. And as digital tools, they don't really cost money or have any supply limitations. So that was accessible. And there's a ton of essentially educational material that was available. And back then, it's changed now. Now there's a lot of very structured educational material. There are classes and even free stuff, right? Free classes, free video series on YouTube you can watch. People write blogs that have tutorial formatted stuff. Back then, it was more like you would pirate a bunch of ebooks. Okay. That was learn C++ in 30 days, and a bite of Python was one that I really liked.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of reading and then messing with stuff and just kind of having little random goals and little programs that I wanted to make. My brother and I, the way with it, he got me into it was we just wanted to make a little text-based role-playing game. Okay. And it didn't really go anywhere necessarily, but it was fun to figure out how to prompt the user for how they want to create their character and then start thinking about how you would structure a game and little 2D games. There's a lot of good material out there for creating little 2D toy projects and stuff. And at some point I got into web development.
Cool.
It's kind of funny to think how much web development is what I currently do professionally. Okay. And it is such a different world, even in the 7 years since I was learning at first, how much things have changed, which really reflects how young of a discipline computer science really is and software engineering. That everything can sort of change on even a 5-year time scale. But anyway, got into web development. I was first prompted because my friend and I in high school, my best friend, his name's Zach, who was also kind of getting into programming with me. We had this economics class. It was our senior year in high school that we absolutely despised. And this was before you had a whole lot of, internet chat options that were available the way you do today, right? There wasn't Slack, there wasn't Discord. Okay. And a lot of the stuff like AIM and, MySpace, the messaging functionality on MySpace or Facebook.
Are those some of the early platforms in which this format has kind of taken off and boomed?
Well, and all those...
AIM was one of them?
Yeah. Okay. If you remember, what was that, AOL Instant Messenger, right? You know, just like the things that you would use on your family computer.
I never heard it called AIM. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is a platform that I'm not familiar with.
In middle school, everyone realized around called it AIM. But yeah, when those things were first coming out, right, those were the big ones. And all of those were blocked on the school network.
Okay.
And so we knew that in this economic class that we hated, we were allowed to use laptops to take notes. Big mistake on teachers' part. And we knew that we needed to make our own little website where we could chat with each other to save ourselves from our sanity, save ourselves from dying of boredom. And so that was the first thing that I built, was this little chat website. And it was really janky. Like, it didn't refresh automatically when you got new messages. Okay. So you just have to like keep refreshing the page every few seconds, which was actually fine for our use case because it was like us and 2 other friends in that class, and we all literally sat next to each other, so you could like hear the person hit the enter key, like, oh, I wonder what they said. But it wasn't laid out like a forum where that makes sense. It was laid out like a chat room.
Okay.
You just didn't receive new messages automatically because I never got around to building that and didn't understand how to essentially write JavaScript or make web pages interactive at that point. But that was the first project that I did. Later, I was making a digital implementation of the game Assassin, famous among high school and college students, which is one where, you know, everybody gets somebody's name and you have to like shoot them with a squirt gun or whatever the rules are.
Yes.
And then you inherit their target, and it sort of works its way down until there's only one person remaining. And so I was creating a digital implementation. And again, this was before everybody had smartphones and apps were ubiquitous. And so it was all done through like a texting interface. Okay. Like there was a website that you as the admin of the game would set up the game and sort of register all the players. Or you would register a game, and then it would say like, okay, tell the person to text to this number, and like here's the format, so they have like a username. Yeah. And then, you know, when we're ready to start the game, it would like text everybody like, here's your target. Okay. And then when you killed somebody, you would get it would ask them like, did this person kill you? And so they would verify, and then you would get you would inherit their target. Wow. Your phone, you know, the server would like send a text message to you, and then you would know who you had to get next. And like I had all these ideas for like, instead of just inheriting their target, like what if there was like, you know, a mode where you had like 5 hours. The whole game was like 5 hours. So it's like you'd play it in an afternoon instead of over the course of a month. Okay. And you just get a new target, like a random new target every time, which is about like who can rack up the most kills. Amazing. This ended up just being like a winter break project. Okay. And so I didn't get to any of that stuff, but I learned a lot of really useful stuff on that project, and honestly things like skills that I still use. Like that is where I learned about how to model things in a database. Okay. Right. So you could keep track of things like games and players and assassination contracts. And I mean, things that like I ended up using in the interview that I got my first real job for, you know.
How cool is that?
That's really like a big part of the original joy of programming for me, is that you would have a goal and you would literally just like go to Google and start searching around, and you'd be like, well, maybe I should read the database manual. Maybe that'll have it. Like, no, that's more like technical stuff. I'm more looking for like, what's the best design here? And then you'd start finding like different people's opinions and different examples, and you'd try to take the principles from the examples and sort of like merge them together and apply it to your use case. And you'd end up like synthesizing this piece of code, but it came from just cobbling together all this disparate information. Okay. And, you know, I sort of started to develop a internal compass for when a design felt good, you know, when it was, felt like it was going to work in the use cases it needed to work to, and like when it felt like it was too complicated or not. And, you know, there's many, many different ways to do things, right? There's lots of different ways to construct programs and tackle problems, and different solutions have different properties, and you sort of you develop a sense over time for which solutions are more aligned with the problem that you have. And like even back then, you know, I was starting to develop that, and then through college developed it more.
Yeah. Do you still do any game development? Like even as side projects, like game creation?
So I don't really program as a hobby anymore. Okay. I don't know if I will again, just because now it is my career, and there's other hobbies now where I can get the same sort of satisfaction of having of going through the design and engineering process, and that aren't as like frustrating as programming.
Yeah.
Because programming can be very frustrating. You know, it's very abstract and immaterial, and things can often not work for the tiniest little reasons, like you forgot a comma somewhere, and you know. And it just takes a lot of gathering lots of different information and synthesizing it.
Okay.
And so I do enjoy it, but it has become more of a career than a hobby for me.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll change in the future. Occasionally, I do get an inkling to do some kind of small game project, and there's some interesting tools out there to facilitate doing that on a hobby level.
Okay.
There's these things called virtual consoles, which are artificially constrained systems you can write programs within.
Okay.
That are meant to mirror the constraints that people had when they were designing video games on truly limited physical consoles like the original Nintendo and the Game Boy. You know, so you have like only a few colors to work with.
So they're really intentional restrictions.
Yeah, you only have
to take you back in time.
Yeah, you have a tiny little screen, only 16 colors, only 8-bit sound, you know. So it because games these days are like so polished and so beautiful and like so well animated, and it's really easy to get sucked into trying to recreate that as a hobby project.
Yeah.
But the reality is like those projects, you know, even indie projects have small teams of like very dedicated full-time people who have been doing it for years and are very experienced, all the way up to like, you know, massive game studios. And so it can be a real trap. And you know, I'm sure you go over this a lot on this podcast, that like constraints breed creativity. And so I've tried out a couple of those. I haven't got anything working. I've sort of been dealing with burnout in computer science for a while because, like I said, I was really, really into it in high school. It's like one of the few things that I did in high school. And I went to college, and it was like even more of that, because not only was I now studying it, and I dove like way into my studies. I like begged professors to let me into their classes without prerequisites.
Yeah.
Because some classes were only offered every 2 years, and I really wanted to take it, and like, you know, worked my way into like a grad level distributed databases class, and
nice.
Took like this junior level class as a freshman, and then the senior level class as a sophomore. And you know, you talk about like it's weird developing a social media presence and like seeing people respond to your podcast episodes. I sort of had a similar moment in college where people would be like, oh, that's a Jared Shumway. And nobody except like computer scientists would do this, right? Like only computer science students like cared at all. It was not a big deal.
They could see your hand in the programming?
No, they would just like see me walk by on campus. They'd be like, oh, that's the guy who's like in this class as a freshman.
Wow.
And it weirded me way out.
Because you were so advanced.
Yeah.
And so ambitious in what you were trying to do.
Yeah. And like the reality is that I am a pretty good programmer, but it's like I had a lot of time to do it, and I was really into it, and I happened to find the right resources that helped me learn the right things. But it was very weird. So I got very into computer science in college as well, and I did an internship every year, which were all terrible experiences. Like so bad that like I'm still trying to like unlearn the damage that those experiences caused. Not great, but still the point that I was just so immersed in computer science. Like all my friends were people who were computer science majors. At Cal Poly, this is exacerbated because at Cal Poly you declare your major on your application, so you're not applying to the school, you're applying to your major.
Wow.
And it is possible to change majors, but it's a very like arduous process that they try to discourage you from going through. And it leads to this phenomenon where students will identify incredibly heavily with their major and the college, right? So it wasn't just like, you know, I was Jared the computer scientist, and then in like my friend circles and classes, and then in like my broader friend circle I was like Jared the engineer, right? Because he was in the School of Engineering. And you know, people would identify as like business students, and like these were big parts of people's identities that they really like clung to and used to understand themselves and each other. You know, where it's like it was hard for people to escape their respective stereotypes. And also sort of like that imposed like these weird social groups that were kind of limited. And like, you know, it wasn't so strict that people didn't know other people, but like I would often find people having conversations like, oh yeah, I try to hang out with my liberal arts friends like at least this much so I can like stay a normal person.
Interesting. Just to get that other culture, like
yes,
to get
to
a little bit of
yeah, and Cal
spectrum
Poly,
within your
and Cal Poly was also on the quarter system, which is kind of a misleading name because summer is one of the quarters. So it's essentially like you have 3 semesters per year, which means your classes are shorter. All your deadlines are tighter. You're doing finals 3 times a year instead of 2 times a year. So it was a very intense academic environment. And then, you know, because you declare your major so early, you like go straight into your major classes, right? Like your very first batch of classes are all contributing towards your major and not just like a general, you know, college education. You take those as well, but like, it's not like some colleges where you start your major classes after 2 years.
Okay.
All this combined to where like, I was hanging out with computer scientists. I was doing computer science in class. I was thinking about computer science. Like computer science was my whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much was everybody that you were interacting with, like your friend group, like your social circle and the bubble that you were living in, were they all computer science as well?
I had a lot of other engineering friends.
Engineering,
you know, like
okay.
my roommates were also engineers. You sort of got grouped into your like freshman year dorms by college. So I had a lot of, you know, I was in an engineering dorm.
Okay.
But like my close friends who I spent the most time with were, I sort of found them through like one of the clubs on campus that was like ostensibly the computer security club, but it was really the like people who are so into computer science, it's like all they want to do and think about club. And so, you know, those are people I spent a lot of time with, and they had their own sort of like ambitions and that were, you know, revolved around their career goals and things like that.
Yeah. When you talked about going back in the past with programming a game, it takes me all the way back to what you said about doing some very rudimentary like 2D games. Did you have inspiration for the 2D games? Like, did you have ones that you grew up on that were like, these are staples?
I mean,
or these are inspiration? Yeah.
Definitely Zelda: A Link to the Past.
Yeah, okay.
Incredible game. Actually, is going through a huge revival right now because of what are called Link to the Past randomizers. What's
that all about?
So they take, you can modify the ROM, so the actual game, and you can take all the unique items, right? Anything that you find in a chest or that a character gives you. So like not random, like, you know, not like hearts that people drop, but like heart containers that are treasure. And takes all of those and shuffles them with each other's locations.
Yeah.
And because a lot of those items are progression items that you need, right? Like you need a bow to beat the first boss. And so the bow is no longer right outside the first boss in the big chest. It's now anywhere in the world. And there's something that they call the logic, which understands the relationships between the locations so that the items are shuffled, but they will always be in an order such that you can beat the game.
Oh, okay.
And so you can play, and people get real good at them, and you can do a randomizer in like an hour and a half, right? You can beat the whole game with the item. You don't know where the items are, and you can beat the whole game in like an hour and a half. Wow. I'm not that good. It takes me like 5 hours.
Okay.
But I've been getting into them recently because one of my nephews I was hanging out with recently, and I was like, he was playing Breath of the Wild, the new Zelda game, and I was like, hey, you ever played classic Zelda? And, you know, got to have like a real like great uncle moment of being like, let me show you what games were like back in my day, and played this like classic game, which is funny because like really I grew up with it because of my older brothers.
Okay.
And, you know, I grew up watching them play, and I was never good enough at the game to really be able to make progress. And then I got to like do this for him. And then after we beat it, I was like, okay, there's also these things called randomizers. Yeah. But he's a great kid. He's like getting super into it. I'm like, okay, I think we need to go here. He's like, you can't go there. You don't have this item yet. I'm like, shit, you're right.
He was picking up on it.
Oh yeah.
How long would it take your brothers to beat the game? Would it be like 5 days?
Yeah, probably like a few days.
So I remember going over to my cousin's house one time, and we were going out to do something. He had been playing Zelda all day long.
Yeah.
Had to put it on pause.
Yeah.
And left the TV on and left the Nintendo on, and then we took off.
Yeah.
And like even then I was just like looking back like, that's not how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
And he's like, there's no game save. Like I'm coming back and I'm going to beat this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bad old days.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a big inspiration. I also during high school got really into this game called Dwarf Fortress, which is sort of like a famous within a niche on the internet. Kind of an interesting story behind it. The guy who makes it lives like the ultimate reclusive life of just like in an apartment that he like basically never leaves and boards up the windows like plywood so light doesn't get in because he has a really weird sleeping schedule. This is all after he got a PhD in math from Stanford, and then just started building this game that is a real simulation. It's like a simulation of a fantasy world.
Okay.
And the objective of Dwarf Fortress, there's different modes, but the one I played is Fortress mode, where you get dropped in and you have a group of 7 dwarfs, and they're outside somewhere, and you need to make them a home, right? So you need to, like, dig into the mountain and carve out caverns and set up farms and get water from somewhere and, you know, manage and expand and grow and design this whole fortress. And the game is, as you might have be able to guess from my description of the creator, very unpolished and like shockingly nuanced in really unnecessary ways. So like the dwarves' bodies are simulated as like full skeletons. Ooh, sorry, I just hit the lever. As like full skeletons down to individual bones and sections of skin, to the point where a dwarf can get in a fight with a wild animal, and it will tell you that like one of their teeth is injured, right? What? Like, yeah, like that level of simulation. And like when you start a world, you have to generate an entire world before you can pick a point to do your fortress, a whole massive world, and it simulates like hundreds of years of history, including like names of dwarven heroes and artifacts that they drop, and like, you know, from a game design perspective, whether or not any of that nuance actually contributes to like meaningful gameplay experience for the player is debatable. But it's definitely a game that, as you sink your teeth into it, it takes a lot of investment. Yeah. Because I haven't mentioned the most iconic aspect of the game, which is that it's in ASCII. It's like it doesn't have like graphics per se. The like classic version of the game is literally like you're at a terminal and there's characters printed in colors, and what color and character it is tells you what it is. And when I say character, I mean like A, B, C, D, dash, hyphen. Or sorry, dash underscore. Right. And so like if you see like a lowercase p that's like light green, then like you know that like, oh, that's like it's like some kind of animal. Right. Or like if you see like,
so very rudimentary.
Yeah. Yeah. And people have like created visual interfaces on top of it to make it a little more accessible. So you actually have like sprites. Yes. Sprite graphics like an old video game. But then the sorry, I'm a real fidgeter.
Oh, you're good, man. I can't sit still either. Like, I wish we'd do these podcasts like standing up.
We'd go for a walk and have
just pacing around a room.
Wind going through the mics. Windy mic is what we can call that.
I like it.
A windy mic episode. Okay, so it's like that kind of game. And that was kind of inspiration too, because I loved the idea. So it's a game that has so many nuanced interlocking systems and simulates such crazy stuff that you just get like these really absurd failure modes. Like your dwarfs have like needs and sort of simulated personalities. Maybe not personalities, but like, you know, they need things and they respond to not having those needs met. And so like a real stumbling block for players after they figure out how food works, which is its whole own journey. The next big stumbling block is like your dwarves' clothes wear down over time, and eventually they wear down enough that it like impacts your dwarves' moods, and then they all get like out of control angry and like burn down your fortress. Wow. Right? Like that's like a failure.
Because they're cold and uncomfortable?
Yeah, and just because they're walking around in tattered clothes that make them unhappy. Or like if they run out of beer, like you don't make water in the game, you like make beer, and like that's what they drink, because that's like, I guess, how these
historically like, accurate
exactly Tormund race works. And like so you can run out of beer and fail, and like you can run out of these things for like crazy reasons. Like you just have these like really funny cascading failures. And it was really fascinating to me that the game is so technical. Like there's all these systems. There's like if you were to program that game, there's all this time spent designing systems and how they interact, and not a lot of time fussing about like the interface and the graphics, which were things that I'm like not really that great at. And so that was really cool to me. But then also that you would get this like emergent complexity that like any of the individual systems, like your dwarves' needs and like farming and the digging system and all that, aren't individually that sophisticated, but they all interacted with each other in ways that that created these like great failure scenarios.
Okay.
And like a big part of playing Dwarf Fortress in like the community of it was sharing how your latest fortress fell apart and like in these spectacular failures that were just so bizarre. And so that was also fascinating to me just from like a game design perspective of you can create these like simple components and then they can create this like rich gameplay.
Does story structure appeal to you at all?
It does.
Yeah. Would you like to also implement a story that you have created? Like, do you have some of those in your head? Story, characters?
I have like bits and pieces.
Okay.
That it's difficult for me to like get into and flesh out.
Sure.
And so like games, it kind of goes both ways. So like I kind of write some things sometimes, but I have a hard time following through on it. With games, I'm very interested in sort of emergent stories like that, where you're not sitting down to design a narrative. You're just putting these pieces in place that will interact to create like new, unexpected things that you couldn't have anticipated. But I'm very interested in like more traditional narrative as well. And this actually brings me back to where we left off with me in college being completely obsessed with computer science, because I had a big breakthrough between my sophomore and junior years in college.
Okay.
Which was that, one, there were other things going on in life outside of computer science.
Yeah.
And two, I wanted to be interested in them. Which was very novel for me at the time and felt like real new territory. But
branching out as a young man.
Branching out. But after this point, like this is when I started to get like really into food and I hadn't really drank much before I turned 21. I was like just turning 21 at the time, and so I was like getting really into beer. And there's a big craft beer scene in San Luis Obispo, so that was a lot of fun. And my friends were beer drinkers. And this is when I started really learning about art. I took this fantastic literature class that just had like the best professor. I'll never forget this professor. The first day of class, we sat down and she showed us a video from Tony Zhu's Every Frame of Painting.
Oh, I love that.
Yes, it was.
Every Frame of Painting is one of the best channels.
It is a big thing that like I can thank that for getting me into movies. Like that, well, two things. That got me to look at movies in a new sort of like artistically sophisticated way I had never looked at before.
Okay.
Right? Because he's so great at breaking down not just like how the movie is necessarily made, but like the artistic choices that go in.
Yeah.
Right.
Why this decision was made? Why do we see this visual? Why do we
and you start to become conscious of like, why is this camera angle used? Why is this camera movement? Look at this blocking. And like, how are these environmental things being wrapped into the scene?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I can really credit is one of my friends from college who loved movies. Like he had a policy which was he would go to the movies all the time and he'd like pay the like, $10 or whatever. And he's like, if I paid $10 to see this, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to find a way to enjoy this movie on whatever level this movie is at. Yeah. And I will find a way to enjoy it. And I had really like hated movies growing up. Like I didn't mind watching them with families, but I don't like going to the movies. And sort of going to the movies with this friend and adopting that attitude really opened it up for me.
Oh, it's great.
So like that was sort of like just going to movies to enjoy them and then sort of developing this like almost artistic criticism side, which boy do I have a lot of thoughts on the term artistic criticism.
Yeah.
And so I started getting really into like art and movies and would like go to like the downtown art museum and just like have these great experiences. So this is like tiny little, like, I think it's just community art. So, it's not like you're going to see like the great works or anything, but like I was discovering that if you really sat down and gave like each piece the time, like you could find these things going on in them that were like genuinely valuable and interesting. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that friend was a great influence, to have that intention going into an experience,
and
a creative experience,
so unpretentiously, right? It's not like I'll enjoy this movie if it's like good enough, and if it does a really good job getting to me, then I'll do it. He's like, no, I'm gonna take myself to any movie that I show up to see. I will go to wherever that movie needs me to go to enjoy it.
Yeah, not like this movie better please me. Yeah, and all of the parameters that I need for a good movie the boxes that need to be checked for me to say, God, that was a good movie. It's like, no, that's not the artist's job. The artist's job is to create, give you an experience, tell you a story, and it either speaks to you or it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, you don't have to go into it passively, as just like, oh, we'll see what happens, and like, maybe I'll like it, maybe I won't. That you can sort of try to get on whatever level the movie is on, right? And sort of meet it on its own terms, where like, I mean, I've literally had experiences where I have tried like different interpretations on and been like, well, what if this movie was actually trying to be like, it wasn't trying to be this super serious thing, and it was trying to be like this more satirical thing. And, yeah. And you sort of like do the work of trying to figure out how you can have a good experience with it.
Do you remember the first film or the first few films that you saw with this friend?
I do. So we were in Palo Alto. We were interning at the same place, and we're in Palo Alto, and Guardians of the Galaxy had just been released. And
nice.
So
excellent.
Which, is sort of like an easy, like, the Marvel movies are easy to look down on, for different reasons nowadays, because they've just been going on so damn long. But like back then, it was just like, superhero movies. But I
how I approach those is just like, do kids like them?
Yeah.
Well, then that's who they were for.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when I see like grown men like shitting on a Marvel movie or even a Star Wars movie. Yeah. And I'm like, did your kids like them?
Yeah.
Do kids like these movies? That's who they were for, man.
Sorry. So we went to see Guardians of the Galaxy, and I just had a blast. It was so much fun, and like the whole theater was really into it. That was another experience I hadn't really appreciated before, was going to movies right when they came out, or in the first few days, and just like feeling the energy of a lot of people who want to be there for it. I think I told you last time about Godzilla. That was another movie that was in this time period. And like that was another one where like there's just these two scenes where like Godzilla finally just like really fucking wrecks like, the two monsters who have been like real a-holes the whole movie, and just like the like emotional release in this like huge like old theater all at once when it happened was super intoxicating. But Guardians of the Galaxy was just like a really fun time, right? And like the great soundtrack, and like it's just I think there's a lot of things to talk about with that movie. But just from the perspective of having fun watching it, it's it's just a fun movie that knows when to undercut itself and knows when to take itself seriously and how to bounce between those things to emphasize both. Yeah. And it's just like a really fun movie.
I haven't seen the new Suicide Squads. Yeah. But Suicide
the HBO
Squad,
ones, right?
Yeah, the HBO one, and it's James Gunn. It's the same director as Guardians, and I heard it's fantastic because it's got his humor and sensibility tied to this wild cast of characters. I'm not really a superhero guy, like I certainly was when I was a kid. Like it's just not something I've carried on into my adult life. Like I liked a handful of the Marvel movies. I saw a lot more than a handful. Yeah. And there's certainly ones that stand out. I think the one that really kicked it off, Iron Man.
I think we talked about this last
might be
time
my favorite. Yeah, we're back
movies.
To it. But by the end of it, I couldn't do it. I really couldn't hang in there. Not that it was a bad movie. Yeah. I was recognizing, you guys didn't make this for me. And I respect that. That is okay. Yeah. But I'm going to bow out.
Yeah. I think I've given you this list before, but like a lot of my favorite movies are from this time period. So and this is in 2014, which is like so many great movies, right? Grand Budapest Hotel, Birdman, Whiplash. I think Ex Machina was that year or right after.
That is a phenomenal film.
Yeah.
Chilling. Just I didn't quite know where that was going. Yeah. And boy did it deliver.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's really challenging. Because I think one of the so it's a really interesting movie because it's very polarizing. In that I've seen people very confidently and with a lot of conviction criticizing that movie for being very sexist, and then other people with a lot of conviction criticizing it for being feminist.
Interesting.
And I love when that happens. Gone Girl is another great example of a movie that elicited both of these reactions. And personally, in both of these cases, I sort of side with with both of these movies being feminist. And Ex Machina was especially challenging because the main character is like such a nice guy, and I think the movie is really making this case that is it Eve?
I think her name is Eve. I believe so.
Okay.
I'm forgetting character names. But yeah.
I couldn't remember the guy's name for the life of me. But I think it
Donald Gleason. Yeah. I just know his real name.
Oh, okay, not the character. Okay.
Not the character.
Wow.
Actually, I don't think it's Donald. It's like Gaelic. It's like Don Hald.
Oh,
like there's
cool.
an H in there. I think so. But it's Brendan Gleeson's son. Anyways, great actor. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
plays
like
a great character.
At the very end, spoilers alert for a 2014 or 2015 movie.
Yeah, deal with it.
At the very end, when Eve is sort of puts on the skin of the other, like the artificial skin, to the point where she can like look human, and is deciding to like go out into the world and emerge into like this new freedom, sort of epitomized by her. I think she talks about her dream of just wanting to like stand on like a corner of a city and just like watch people go by and feel the sun. Decides to lock Caleb, is that his name? This main, the protagonist character.
I think you're right.
Decides to like lock him in this like isolated home where he will
no
doubt
die. Yeah. He will die of dehydration. Yeah.
Is sort of this commentary on like the way that heteronormative relationships can be almost like enslaving, but at least restrictive for women, right? And that for this sort of like artificial being becoming a woman, that it was necessary for her to like make this decision that like on the face of it feels very cold-hearted.
Okay.
Because like essentially that like his kindness towards her was not selfless, right? It was towards this end of sort of like capturing her in his own way.
Sure.
And kind of the contrast between him and the sort of like bad guy who's like isolating himself and is creating all these
who is the creator
robots essentially and enslaving them after giving them like essentially real consciousness, that it sort of creates an interesting contrast and comparison between these characters and like gets you to ask like, are they as different as you think, right? Like, is this guy like essentially enslaving these sex robots that different than this other guy who just like wants to make this sex robot his like personal like girlfriend who like does what he wants her to and meets all of his needs? Which I think is very interesting, very challenging. It's a good movie.
It is challenging. It certainly is. And I hadn't actually heard of those criticisms. I certainly took it on a literal level, more on face value of kind of where AI and Android technology goes in the future. And certainly that ties into what human nature is and what the history of mankind has shown us, or what men can do in a hierarchy. And if you are in complete control of the organism as you created it, that was very challenging. Because it wasn't human life, but it draws up all of these parallels to dynamics that are happening.
Is it similar enough?
What'd you think about Grand Budapest Hotel?
I love that movie.
Yeah, me too.
That is a movie that gets sadder every time I watch it.
Truly.
Because the first time I was like, wow, it was a fun movie, kind of a sad ending, but like, these guys were really friends. But like the tragedy of the magnitude of the like protagonist's loss hits me more each time.
Totally. When he that final fight like on the train. And
it just like
in the end they shot him. Like it's just like it's piercing. It's just like he's one of the most elegant characters I've ever seen in cinema.
And I love at the very end when the protagonist is older, Zero, once he owns the hotel and the main character is done with his story with him. And he says something to the effect of like, M. Gustav, he says, no, I think that his time was over long before he was in the world. And like, that's, M. Gustav is a very flawed character, which Zero, literally like the movie, which is textual, right? Zero even says like, you know, he's incredibly vain, as were
So
like all of
vain.
his sexual partners.
Totally.
And
Why
like,
blonde?
yeah,
Because they all were.
And so as flawed as that character was and sort of caught up his own shit, like that statement, like I think his time had passed long before he was in the world, is like such the ultimate commendation of that character. Sorry, I always say ultimate condemnation.
Yeah.
Opposite here, right? That's like the nicest thing that he could say about him. And that moment just lands. And like when he shows you that he carries Agatha's brooch with him everywhere and like sleeps in the room, like, from, you know, a character that started with nothing as a refugee, as his country and family were being like burned down, and then had this life with these people and then didn't again.
It is a tragic arc. It's one of Wes Anderson's saddest films.
Yeah, and it's sad.
Are you a fan of his other work?
I really love Moonrise Kingdom.
Okay.
For very personal reasons.
Were you a Boy Scout?
I was. That's not why though.
That's not why. Okay.
And those are my two favorite. I haven't seen the Isles of Dogs movie. I liked Fantastic Mr. Fox, but I don't know if I loved it. You know, now that I'm like an expecting dad, I feel like I should rewatch that movie because I feel like there's a lot of sort of dad energy in Mr. Fox, right? And his sort of pull between wanting to be this like young thief who can just like take on risks versus like having this responsibility to his family to not be careless and do this reckless shit. So maybe I should rewatch that with a new perspective.
He has great elements of, well, family themes.
Yeah.
Every story that he writes has this family element. It's so strong.
Yeah.
In his writing and in his creation. And I'd be interested if you would ever have you seen any of it, like his first three, Bottle Rocket, Rushmore, or Royal Tenenbaum?
I have seen Royal Tenenbaums. I'd actually like to rewatch it because I didn't really connect to it the first time, but I feel like I would more now with some of my recent life experiences.
Yeah. Well, since you brought that up, I would like to talk about you are an expecting father.
Yes.
And
yes,
indeed. As a friend of mine, we haven't seen each other in a minute, and I want to touch base and check in and see how you're doing with that, man.
Well, we were sort of off to a rocky start because my wife, we found out that she was pregnant, and 4 days later, we were up at 3 a.m, and she was in excruciating pain and asked me to take her to the emergency room, which was very scary because for those 4 days, we were incredibly excited about this pregnancy.
Where was her pain?
In her abdomen.
Okay.
Not the place you want it to be.
Nope.
And so we got to the emergency room at like 3 a.m, and we're like, you know, people coming and going, taking blood, doing an ultrasound. Very tough night.
Yeah.
Eventually met with a doctor who thought that he had probably figured out what was going on based on the results of one of the tests, and recommended that we have surgery, and that it was a hard decision to make for a number of reasons. One is that it was hard to tell on the ultrasound what exactly was going on, but it suggested something that, if it were the case, could be very bad. But maybe actually that's not going on and it's fine and the pain would resolve itself naturally. And then also the complication of, you know, doctors, especially very early on in a pregnancy, want to intervene as little as possible. And there's a lot of drugs involved in having a surgery that are what I think they called Class C pregnancy drugs, that are things that they don't have any evidence that they are bad for a pregnancy, but they aren't 100% sure that they're okay. And most things fall into this category, as you might imagine.
They're in Class C.
Yeah, because you can't really, you know, do medical experiments on pregnant women early in pregnancy, because that would be hella unethical. But, you know, my wife's father is a, like, trained doctor and public health official. And so we called him at, like, you know, 5 a.m, 6 a.m, something like that. And he advised us to do the surgery And so we did the surgery. So she's like, we're like walking across the hospital to the surgery wing. This is on a Sunday morning at like 7:30 in the morning, 8 in the morning. So like nobody is there because they don't do surgeries, like scheduled surgeries on Sunday.
Yeah.
And she goes into surgery, and like I'm sitting out in the waiting room, and it takes like an hour and a half, and it was supposed to take like an hour, so I'm like freaking out. I've also been up all night, so I'm like trying to sleep in these like horrible chairs.
What an ordeal for you guys.
And I was able to calm down for like 30 minutes, like long enough to get like 30 minutes of sleep. But eventually the doctor comes out, and the surgery went well, and they were able to remove what was causing her pain, and without any obvious complications. And so we got home and got to finally start to like unwind a little bit. Since it was an abdominal surgery, she was really out of it.
Yeah.
Couldn't sit up by herself, was just in a lot of pain. And then plus like the pregnancy symptoms were really starting to pick up at the same time, so like really bad nausea and not like total aversion to foods and the whole thing. So it was a really, really tough few weeks. And then the whole time there was sort of this energy of like, is the pregnancy okay? Have we done something horribly wrong? Like, can we go back to getting our hopes up, or should we be worried? And then, like generally pregnancies there's lots of reasons that pregnancies can sort of end just spontaneously very early on, because it's a complicated biological process, and there's lots of ways that it can just like not come to fruition. And so, we were also in that period, and sort of like, is this going to make that worse?
In that scary window of time. Yeah.
Oof. Yes. So it was tough. It was very tough. Thankfully, we're past that. Just got to 12 weeks. So
that's awesome, Jared.
Yes.
I'm so happy. Oh, I'm so happy.
Yeah. So like, waves of relief. And yeah, we've met with our midwives, which is great. They're found 2 like wonderful people who are very like, yeah, it's super hard. You should be happy every time that you're able to get some food down, and like, don't beat yourself up about, not being perfect about prenatal vitamins or something. If they're making you sick, like, just do what you can.
How many prenatal vitamins are you taking daily?
I actually did try them because they were making her so sick. And I see where she's coming from. Like, as pregnancy heightens your sense of smell and therefore taste, and makes you like averse to food. And prenatal vitamins I'm sure they contain like, I haven't looked at the actual list, but they smell like they contain like fish oil.
Okay.
And they come in like those really plasticky capsules. It's like they really do smell quite nauseating.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to figure out ways to make it easier on her.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, maybe they smell so terrible because it's just the capsule that they come in. And so I tried like breaking open a capsule and like mixing it into a drink, and it like didn't mix at all. So it's just this powder on the top of like a tea or something. I like drank it, it was like all caked up, and I was like, oh God. Yeah, so that didn't help.
So bad.
Did not help.
Oh, that's rough.
But I was trying. We eventually found liquid prenatal vitamins that you can blend into like a smoothie.
Is that a little better?
It's a little
like
better.
If you got some fruit in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little better. I won't say it's great, but it's a little better.
Okay.
Just
getting the, like, you are a father to be. Are you feeling a little stronger?
Definitely.
Like, are you getting dad strength?
I definitely have been experiencing some dad energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially right after the surgery. I mean, during the surgery too. That's more just like partner energy, right? Where you're like, I'm going to stay up literally all night and hold this person's hand and like not freak out so that they can freak out.
Yeah.
But like, afterwards, just trying to like keep the house in order and keep meals on the table and do all of that, like just sort of hold down the fort while she was recovering and adjusting to the new symptoms. So
that's good.
Yeah. And I would say
you're doing great, Jared.
Thank you.
You're doing great.
Thank you. So that was definitely a boost of strength. Then I got super exhausted for a few weeks. Luckily, we had one of her friends wanted to come out and help, which is hard because we're not great at accepting help, but she sort of forced us and would like make fun of us until we accepted help, which really helped.
That's what a true friend does.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And now I would say my dad energy is shifting more to, I don't know quite how to put it. I guess I've always been like kind of a self-conscious person who has gotten caught up in like, oh, should I be doing this? Or should I be like, just like worrying about dumb shit, like how I'm
Yeah.
dressed and things like that. And it's not like I've ever been dressed great, right? Like it's at one point in college, I was dressed really well for a computer scientist, which means that I went from wearing like tech shirts and jeans with flip flops every day to like wearing button up shirts that like mostly fit and like some jeans that didn't have like, cargo pockets, right?
Sure.
But would sort of get caught up in all those things and what other people were doing and all that kind of shit. And a lot of that has just disappeared. So I'm just like, here's what my life is about. I need to get my shit together so that everything's in order for this baby. And
That's
like
great.
it's been a real like simplifying force in my life. And really motivating too to like continue to dive into like improving my mental health and tackling like old traumatic memories and shit like that. Things I just want to like. I was doing that before, but now there's like a new, even bigger motivation that work is worth doing.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to hear you say that. I'm very curious and like just that the response of saying I need to quit being so egocentric.
Yeah.
Around like I'm so self-involved with like how I look and how people perceive me. This is not important. And like this seems to be the perspective enhancer of all perspective enhancers is
Truly.
The child on the way.
Truly.
You're like, okay, all of that shit gets pushed by the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there's been a lot of just like, I just don't have time for this shit, whatever. And what else?
Dude, you're doing great.
Thank you.
I gotta say,
I remember.
Don't feel pressure, man.
So
you're doing awesome, Jared.
One thing that we have struggled with is that parenting in the United States, at least, maybe other places, at least the parts I've been in, that sort of the parenting and popular conception in the United States is that it's like fucking terrible, right? That it's like you will get no sleep and you will have no social life and you will never do anything fun ever again. It's sort of how people talk about it, right? And so, we've been getting a lot of advice from friends. It's like, be sure to take advantage of your freedom now because you're not going to have it anymore. And like, be sure to like enjoy time with your partner because you're not going to have it anymore. And I just don't believe those things.
Yeah.
Because I'm not saying that I don't think parenting isn't hard. Certainly it will be. Like the first bit, especially where you really don't get any sleep. I think that part's true, right? I think that like largely you get a lot less sleep, especially with a newborn because they don't have a schedule.
Yeah.
And that there's certainly difficulty that you have this like very dependent thing to take care of. But I don't think that it has to be this like, that it has to be like this horrible torture the way that people talk about it. And that it can sometimes be depicted. And I actually feel quite a lot of conviction and pretty excited that we're going to really enjoy being parents, that it is something that will make us, that will deepen our relationship, that we will see, that we're just going to be doing this thing that we both find very profound and meaningful together.
Yeah.
And that we'll both need each other's help in a lot of ways. And I think that we have so far been really good at being able to support each other.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's getting a surgery at 3 a.m. or whether it's like getting through quarantine together.
Sure.
And I think that we'll just get a lot of joy out of raising a child. I think that there's a lot of just like very special things that happen, right? That like watching like a little person develop is really fascinating. And like, we've learned from our own nieces and nephews that like every kid comes with their own personality. That like, there's you have some input, but largely like you just sort of find out what you get. I think that'll be a really fun process. And
yeah, there's hard wiring, there's soft wiring.
Yeah.
Like there's going to be a mixed bag of a person that's going to become a version of you and Caitlin.
Yeah.
And I think as far as that argument around
I mean, I will say that
yeah,
it's mostly Caitlin's friends who are women telling her that. And I really suspect this is because most marriages in the United States, at least, have very strict gender roles around like what the husband does and what the wife does. And that it is largely expected that the wife will give up her entire self to be the most like dedicated, committed mother possible full time. I think that most of all is what I am trying to work to not have happen. In a lot of ways, we try to have as much as possible an egalitarian relationship and sort of take responsibilities, like joint responsibilities, according to like spreading the load evenly and what we're good at. So like, you know, I do a lot of like the contact with people because Caitlin hates calling people on the phone. But like, I hate, you know, we have to like get the siding and roof replaced on our house. Yeah. And I hate having to figure out like what the options are. So, you know, like a few weeks ago, she reached out to a bunch of people. And then I like every morning met with a different contractor to go over things and all that. Yeah. And you know,
that's like, your partnership.
Yeah.
Like there's the role distribution. Yeah. Like these are all things that need to be done. And you guys make such a great team that you cover all these bases.
We certainly try.
Well, and the fact that your life is gone because of the child.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair as far as like, how you guys are going to set things up.
Yeah.
And it's a balance between like your needs, the children's needs, certainly the baby's need is that's first and foremost.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to completely remove who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so on the same topic, like another thing that I've tried to set up in my life is that I work remotely. And one of my big motivations for doing that was that I saw a couple of my coworkers who were remote and had a lifestyle that I really wanted to emulate, which was working remote as a software engineer and being able to be a very involved parent. Right. So like I had this coworker who was like the chief information security officer. I really respected him. He was a great guy. And like every day at, you know, like 3:00 his time, he would log off for an hour to like walk to his son's school and pick him up and take him to the park. Yeah. And then if he had more work to do, he would like bring his laptop and like watch his kid play with the other kids at the park and like finish up his work.
Okay.
And got to be really involved, right? And got to like co-parent in a true sense, right? As opposed to like you come home at the end of the day because you've been working and like dinner better be on the table and like the kids better be whatever style, like, you know, old school style parenting.
Sure.
In America, at least.
And I grew up with it too. It's like we all have to be around the table at dinner. Like that was, if that didn't happen, it was a crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I hope that will address some of the imbalance, which I think leads to this. I think another thing that leads to this is just that parents have like crazy expectations right now. You know, it's like you need to keep your kid involved in school and after school activities and like artistic development programs. And like, they better get into an Ivy League school. So you better like make sure they're doing SAT test prep and have tutors for the classes they're struggling in. And you better get them to like their sporting events every day of the week. And like, there's just this, it's like capitalism applied to child rearing. Yeah. Right. It's just this like urgency and you have to get everything right all the time. And it's pure like work and value put in is like value returned in terms of your kid. And like, we're really trying to not subscribe to that. Right. We're trying to think really critically about like how can you be there to help your child develop in a way that gives them room to develop and helps them like capitalize on the things, not capitalize.
I love that. Hey, Freudian slip. That's cool.
Which literally, but you know, like sort of get involved in the things that they enjoy and help them with the things that they struggle with, and sort of like teach them life skills that I, frankly, wish I had been taught better growing up.
Sure.
Because there's shit in this life that just needs to get done, and you know, it would be nice if your kid, when they grew up, knew how to like find the motivation to do the things that need to get done, but that it's not like this like, here's everything you need to do to be successful, and we're going to make sure you hit every single step, because I think that's just crazy making, and is another way that like
it is
women especially are encouraged to give up their entire life in order to do this thing for their kid.
And it is crazy kind of what's put in front of you, but your instincts are the thing that's sane. Like you are getting these instinctual urges around like, okay, these insecurities need to go by the wayside. Yeah. Because my focus needs to be on what the child needs, and that's going to be number one, this is what we focus on.
Yeah.
And I think there is some truth. This is coming from me not being a parent.
Yeah.
But I'm an uncle and I love my nephews. There is a reality to the fact that you lose sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It's about their sleep schedule.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get them into a healthy pattern.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes in and out. It waxes and wanes for several years.
Yeah.
But it's over in a flash.
Yeah.
This is the thing I'll say from no experience, but I challenge any parent to really come at me on that. It's like, this is over in just a flash, and then they're people.
Yeah.
And so those times that people are like, well, cherish it while you got it.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be around for long. It's like, yeah, but that period's not going to be around for long.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you get to be selfish again.
Yeah.
And then they're grown up and they don't need you.
Yeah.
And then it's like, are you appreciating those moments? So my distant relationship with that is with my nephews, and I get to be around these little boys who they need so much. They can't do things for themselves.
Yeah.
But they're learning how, and you're teaching them in the moment, and it is so special. Yeah. And as soon as they don't need you anymore, it's going to be heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I'm going to be devastated by this.
Yeah. And something else that I'm really looking forward to is I went on a trip with my wife to see a bunch of her nieces and nephews, and like it was just this like great little summer vacation thing in a cabin, and like it really opened my eyes to how much fun hanging out with kids can be. And it sort of, so for instance, one of the things we did is that their grandfather rented like an ATV, and then since I was an adult, he was like, hey Jared, do you want to like take the kids out in the ATV ride? I was like, yes I do, that would be great. And it sort of hit me that like so many things that you do as an adult for kids are really like things that they'll enjoy, but like you just want to do them and enjoy them on a kid level.
Yeah.
Right. So, like going a little too fast around the turds, and like, or, like throwing them into the pool, like, or, I got to run around and play tag, and like, there are all these things that are like, oh yeah, I'm just being like a very dedicated adult, like giving my time and attention to these sweet children. But really it's like, fuck yeah, I want to do that. Like, of course,
I want to be a child like you.
Yes.
I want to connect with you on your level.
Yeah, and that joy of like being able to introduce them to things that you love. And like walking the balance of like finding the things in common, right? But like when you do find the things in common, right? Like with my niece or with my nephew, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we played Link to the Past, and he was like so into it, right? It was such a joy to find this thing that he loved in the same way that I loved it, and then I just got to like introduce him to this whole world, and do something that I wouldn't have spent all that time doing otherwise.
That's so cool,
and I think it's gonna be great.
Mm-hmm. Jared, I love talking with you, man. You are a creative guy, and you taught me a lot about kind of the world that you operate in.
Yeah. I mean, if it's interesting, we could talk about it more sometime.
Absolutely, man. Hey. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you for the glasses.
Happy hump day. This is Hot Mike. We're out.